Let's hit the high road. Let's hit the high road. It's the first touch, strong connection. It lays deep in your soul. Feel the kindness strongly coming. 'Cause you can achieve your goal. Let's hit the high road.
Hi, this is Nancy Yearald, and welcome to High Road to Humanity. And I have Jim Willis here today. And Jim, welcome to the High Road.
Good to be with you.
I am really happy you're here. He's written this cool book. We're going to be talking about the near-death experiences. And if you're watching me on video, you can see I'm holding up the book. It's Afterlife Journeys and Revelations by Jim Willis. And I'm really excited that he's here. You know, we don't know enough about the afterlife. And before I get into talking about some stuff, I just want to say, I want to preface this show with his own words. He says, when I retired to the woods of South Carolina, I wanted to experience a passion similar to those built in Stonehenge, strong enough to inspire me to move megaton boulders halfway across England. That is to say, I retired with an agenda. Okay, God, it's you and me. No structures, no restrictions, no theology, no hold barred. 24 hours a day. You are my only passion. I love this so much. You
Oh,
say
thank you.
you say you like a challenge. Bring it on, like Jacob of old who wrestled with God. I had one prayer on my lips. I will not let you go until you bless me. Imagine my surprise when in totally unexpected way, God answered and did just that. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So this is going to be a really nice conversation with Jim. Hey, listen, before we get into it, I need to thank everybody, who's taken my angel classes. They're up, okay? They're up on my website. There are 3 classes. The first class is connecting with spirit, with God, connecting to the earth energies. The second is spiritual law, and I talk about the angelic realm. And then the third class is connecting with your guardian angel. You can take them separately. You can get them all together, but they are up on my website. They're very good, if I do say so myself. And and I hope you guys are enjoying them. I'm getting some really good feedback. So I want to say that. I do want to mention, if you want to pick up my book, Wake Up, The Universe is Speaking to You. I've relaunched it. It is on Amazon. If you go to Barnes and Noble, you'll see the original. Okay. So it's the original still at Barnes and Noble, and the new one is over at Amazon. One more time, I know you guys are probably getting tired of hearing about it, but my new book is coming out. I'm very excited about this, Jim. It's a guide to angel connection using spiritual law. And it comes out December the 10th. And so that is what I hear from the publishers, and I'm very excited about that. Now, I asked Jim if he wanted to talk about this, so we'll see if he chimes in or not. But I need to bring up what's going on the college campuses. I talked about it on the podcast that I just did recently. I talked about how this is all like being orchestrated. Somebody's financing this. But I want to talk about how it's affecting the Jewish children who are attending this school. And it's really difficult. And just for a lot of people. Now, I know in some states, they've put a stop to this kind of violence of them putting up a different flag and taking down the United States flag, which is really terrible, especially when you're going to one of these universities. But there's been so much unrest, and I do send prayers out to all the people. I stand with Israel. I am not afraid to say that. I do stand up for people. We're all these souls in these bodies, and we're going to talk about that today. And none of us is any different from the other. We're all just these souls, aren't we, Jim?
Yeah. Yeah, it is a tough time, and in
It
that
is.
regard, I've got a sneaking suspicion that there's so much going on behind the scenes that none of us know. I'm
Yeah.
so insulated from all this. I live out here in the woods.
Good for you.
I I have to keep a I have to keep a charger for my battery in my car because I don't use it enough and it keeps running down.
Right.
Days go by when I don't see anybody, and I look at the television, and boy, I can be pretty rattled. I mean, by what I see. I have
Mhm.
a very good friend who lives out in British Columbia, in Canada who is tries to send out. Um, he's an old school friend of mine, and
Okay.
he has quite a mailing list, and he tries to send out the latest articles and everything else, and he's been trying to be so well balanced. So
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep my foot in the thing. It just looks to be so complicated and so difficult. It's a tough time that we
It's
live
a
in.
tough time. And you have to send prayers to the people over there in Palestine, the Palestinians, as well as you have to, send prayers to the people in Israel.
Hmm.
And of course, there's the good and the bad. And it's difficult. And we know that we've got some people who are just real killers out there. But let's bring it back, because we are these souls in these bodies. And you
Hmm.
wrote about near-death experiences. And I read what you said, but I guess my biggest question is, tell us your story. I mean, why did you decide, okay, I'm going to go on this mission and I'm going to write a book on near-death experiences? Why this?
It's a long story.
That's okay.
Normally, I'm sure as you well know, um, when you've written a lot of books, you have a tendency to pay attention when a publisher says, "We'd like a book on such and such, and here's your advance check." I mean, that helps
Oh my.
motivate you,
Okay.
but
All
that
right.
was that was not the case with this book here. Near-death experience is kind of in a way, it's a sequel, and in a way, it's not. I wrote a book called The Quantum Akashic Field, which is about out-of-body experiences,
Okay.
which was something I began to experience after I retired and moved out here to the woods. And it was with a different publisher. Akashic Field is with Inner Traditions, and Near Death Experience is with Visible Ink. But still, it goes back 50 years. Back in the 70s, I was just out of school and I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And like everybody in their 20s, I knew everything, right? I had all the answers.
Yeah.
I had all the latest scientific stuff. And granted, I was a systematic theologian and very left brain thinking. And I was pastor of my first church and all this kind of thing. I'm I'm ashamed to say that I was more of a hoper than a believer.
Oh,
I hoped, um, and it was really strange because I was writing. I mean, I was preaching about angels, and I was preaching about other, dimensions. And at Christmas time, I would sing "Angels We Have Heard on High" and
yeah.
"Hark the Herald Angels Sing," and I would be preaching about it. But it was all head knowledge.
Okay.
Somewhere in the back of my head was the idea that this is well, back then it was the 20th century, back in the 70s. And the term near death experience hadn't even been coined yet. That didn't come along until Raymond Moody wrote his book, Life After Life, back in 1975. And this was just
Yeah.
before that.
Yeah.
So we didn't even have a term in the language to describe near death experiences yet. But I was called one night to the hospital. Uh, um, a very good friend of mine, a dear, dear woman. In the book, I call her Hannah.
Yeah.
She was in the hospital, and I was told that probably this was her last stop. She was probably going to be dying soon. And I got to visiting Hannah just about every day. We talked, but Hannah loved the old hymns of the church. So I got in the habit of taking my guitar with me, and I'd sing, "Oh, In the Garden" and all those old songs, the old rugged
Mhm.
cross and everything else. And she would like it. And sometimes the nurses would even wheel in other patients, so they could join in the concert and all this kind of thing. And it was,
Yeah.
I hate to say it was a lot of fun because Hannah was on her deathbed, but it was. She was just such a positive, uplifting character. And meanwhile, I was doing this stuff uh, pretty much analytically.
Hmm.
I knew all the science and all this kind of thing, but I didn't have any real experience yet. Well, Hannah said to me one day, it turned out to be the last day I saw her alive. She said, did you bring any, or who did you bring with you this time?
Oh, yeah. I read
And
this story in your book,
I
by the
said,
way.
who did I bring with me? What do I mean? Who did I bring? She said, yeah, oh, I said, Hannah, I'm just here by myself. I was putting my guitar away. And she said, "Oh, sometimes they wait till you're gonna I think the music attracts them." Well, I didn't think music is vibration.
Sure.
And I didn't even think of that. So I said, well, you know, she says, well, sometimes they wait till you leave. That's when they come through the portal. And she used the word portal. And I'm saying, portal, the door? You know, she couldn't see out in the hallway. I could. I looked out, you know, in the hallway past
Yeah.
her bedside, and nobody was there. So I didn't want to disturb poor Hannah. She was an old woman just about ready to pass away. So I said, well, I'll see you next time, Hannah. But on my way out, I stopped by the nurse's station and I said to the nurse, what's Hannah talking about? Who did I bring with me? They're coming through the portal. And the nurse said, oh, she's been talking like that. Back in the 70s, medical people, especially hospital people, were not as attuned to the idea of near-death experience and
Oh, they
about
are now. Okay.
visitations from the other side. They weren't really even looking into it yet. They
Okay.
were progressive. They were with it. You know, they knew the latest stuff, and all of us knew that all of these things were just visions because the brain was shutting down. It wasn't getting the blood that it should, and the neurons weren't firing off, and all this kind of stuff. So even though I was preaching about this stuff, preaching about angels and
Mhm.
angelic visitations and angels coming through another dimension and bringing a message, you know, at Christmas time. And I was preaching about it, but I didn't believe any of it to speak of, you know, really. I
You hadn't
just thought
seen
it
it
was,
yet, huh?
no, no, I hadn't. Oh, and I'm so ashamed of myself, but that's the way I
Oh
was when I
God.
was young, you know. Can't
Sure.
get too hung up about it. It was just the way it was.
Yeah.
Well, at any rate, I got the word that Hannah had passed on, and
Mhm.
so I went and I led her funeral service, and I sang in the garden and with my guitar, and that was it. But I could never really forget what she had said when she talked about bringing in other people who come in through the portal because they are attracted by the music, the
Mhm.
vibration of the music. Well, 50 years went by, and in that 50 years, a lot changed. I changed totally, I can completely. And I had also reached the end of my ministry, and I had retired, and I was living out here in the woods when a couple from the last church that I served down in Florida came to visit me. And he said to me, you know, my mother died. And I said, yeah, I had heard that. And I knew his mother. She reminded me of Hannah. She was a
Okay.
wonderful lady.
Yeah.
And she used to love the old hymns of the church too, you know, that kind of the old gospel music.
Hmm.
Well, at any rate, he said, you know, she said something very strange to me before she died. And I said, what's that? He said, I was in her hospital. She said, who did you bring with you? And I said, whoa, who did you bring with you? That's what Hannah said. And he said, yeah. And then she said, sometimes they come in after you leave, they come through the portal. She used the
Said the
same word,
same
the
thing.
portal. 50 years apart. Now, you have an incident like that, two incidents like that happen 50 years apart. You have to say, okay, there's something here. So
Right.
that when a very good friend of mine, when I was still in the last year or two of my ministry, a very good friend of mine, a member of my church, had a near-death experience. His was quite different. He worked in a hospital. He worked in an OR. As a matter of fact, I asked him, he had a very technical job. I asked him, but he was a funny guy. And I asked him, what is your job? And he said, well, you know how they're putting in all these new things like knees and ankles and shoulders and all this kind of stuff. I said, yeah. He said, well, my job is to make sure they don't have any parts left over.
Oh
And
my God. In the body?
yeah.
Okay. All
So I
right.
said, I said, okay, okay, you know, that's about as far as I can understand. He was being very nice to me, you know, that kind of thing, but it was
Oh
a
God.
technical job. But at any rate, one day while he was at work in the hospital, right down the hall from the OR where he worked, matter of fact, he was on his way there, he had a heart attack. And he collapsed right there, and they got him into the. If you're going to have a heart attack,
Have it at the
uh,
hospital, right?
you might as well be in a hospital with
Okay.
people act, you know, who you know, and you
Yeah.
know, doing what you do. And sure enough,
Oh God.
he made it through. They had to do an emergency triple bypass, but they made it through. Except after it was all done, everything was supposed to be done. He couldn't breathe, and he flatlined, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And a very good friend of his had a sense that the breathing tube that he was still had in was clogged,
Oh.
and he couldn't get any air. So the friend actually reached in and pulled out the breathing tube, and Joe took his first breath of real air since, he had stopped.
Wow.
Well, he told me this story and he was very reluctant because, quite frankly, he didn't believe in any of this stuff really either, even though he was a churchman and he had the head faith like I had 50 years ago.
Hmm.
But when he told me this story, it was just he and his mother-in-law and me sitting around his kitchen table after it was all over. And I said, Joe, this story has got to be told because he talked about all of the things that happen with a typical out of body experience. And it was just so typical. I said, can I use your story to close this book out on near death experience that I'd like to do? And he said, absolutely. So he let me use his story. And it turns out his story winds up the last chapters of the book. So that's where the book came from. But in between, there
There's
were
a
a
lot.
lot of things that I couldn't explain. I couldn't understand. And I had visions of, I mean, I had talks with people who were in the hospital and telling me, there's my guardian angel. There's a being of light. And they would describe it in a Christian context, it might be Jesus, or in a Jewish context, it might be Moses or one of the Old Testament writers or something like that.
Whoever they resonated with is who comes
Yeah,
forward. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they
Hmm.
would tell me this, and I wouldn't argue with them, but I didn't see them.
Right.
Toward the end I did, but I didn't see them for much of the time. And so for all those years that went by, it was just a matter of, yeah, sure, okay, if it gives you comfort, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I'm ashamed of myself now. I really am.
Yeah. Well, I have a question for you, Jim.
Yeah.
After you've done all this work, and we'll get into the book here a little bit because I want to talk about how it's set up and all of that. But now that you've done all the research, who do you think is coming through the portal? Do you think it's people? Do you think it's lost souls? Or do you think it's relatives that would like to hear the music that are waiting for her? What's your feeling on that?
Yes to all of the above, I think. I really have come to my own conclusion, and
Okay.
I'm not going to push this on anybody else. It
Sure.
it just works for me. But I really do believe that we come from what I like to now call source.
Right.
I used to use the word God readily, but then I began to understand as I was doing seminars and things like that, that a lot of people have different ideas about God. And when I say the word God, they have their own idea and they may think that I'm talking about what they're talking about when in reality we may be far
Right.
apart.
I'm with you. That's what I do too. And I'm just going
Yeah.
to break in and say that I do spirit in my new
Yeah.
book. I did
Hmm.
spirit slash God because a lot of people, and I'll just say this, nothing again. Well, I don't really like organized religion to be straight with you.
I,
And I'm,
I'm
yeah,
I'm a I'm an organized clergy and I haven't been in church for 16 years, so I
yeah. I mean, I
understand
do
what
have
you're
a reverend,
saying.
I do have a license. It's behind me up there.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, I just think that, you have to do the best that you can, and you have to just, how can I say this? Just connect with that divine energy. You can call it
Hmm.
source, you can call it God, you can call it spirit, but it's so important that people learn to connect. But
Yeah, yeah.
getting
And I've come to believe that we come from source. We are part of
yes,
that source. I like to picture it as the still point at the center of the circle,
mhm,
where there's perfect unity, perfect all those things that people say when they come back from a near-death experience. It was beautiful, it was joyous, it was restful, it was peaceful, it was accepting, total acceptance you have over and over again. Perfect unity, perfect oneness. But when you stop to think about it, there's something that you can't experience in that kind of environment, and that is individual growth,
right,
because the individual is so wrapped up in the total unity of the whole thing.
right,
So I think all of us make at one point a courageous decision to leave the source, to come out here to what I like to call the rim, the
yes.
perception realm,
Oh, I
and
live on
help.
the rim.
Yeah, there you go. I live on the edge myself, but
No, I'm on the rim. I'm up in Payson, Arizona. We call it the
oh,
rim.
there you go. There you
We
go.
call it the rim.
Well,
That's so funny.
I was in Nogales at a church there in Nogales some years ago where I
Yeah.
stayed for a couple of years, and It's beautiful country out there.
Yeah.
But
Um,
anyway, I've come to believe that we make that decision to come out here
yes.
in to gather experience, to do
Right.
what we cannot do in perfect unity, in perfect wholeness or oneness.
Right.
And that gives me a tremendous amount of encouragement because I know that I've come out here to gather experience, not just the good experiences, because experiences come both good and bad.
Right.
I've come out here to gather that experience. So when life is tough, when life is difficult, when I'm feeling lonely or alone, when I'm feeling nobody understands, if it's
Yeah.
pain or
Yeah.
something like that, I can say, instead of just trying to push it off and say, oh, what's wrong? I can say, wait a minute, I came out here to experience this. So I can dig right in and say, I don't care if it's good or bad. I'm going to experience it, even if it hurts, because I honestly believe that when we leave this plane, when we leave our bodies, we go back to that source. And one of the things that happens, people talk about it over and over again, is a life review where
Right.
our life goes. We even have slang for my life flashed before my eyes. That kind of, well, I
Right.
think it does. All those experiences, and I don't think it's a judgmental review. I don't think
Right.
it's
I agree. I agree.
we're gonna check you out, see if you're good enough to go on, that kind of thing. And I don't think that's it at all.
Yeah.
I think we stop long enough to take all of those experiences, put them in a volume that goes into what I call the Akashic record, or some people call it the Book of Life or whatever. We
Right.
deposit them all there and then return back to that, return back to the source. Now I know some of my Christian friends might be saying, "Well, wait a minute, you're from the source and you're going back to the source, and if the source is God, you're saying you're God." I'm saying, well, it's in the Bible. Jesus said it in the New
We
Testament.
are all
Psalms,
God. Right.
he said, "What? Know
Yeah.
ye not that ye are gods?" He said.
Yes, we are. We
Well,
all have
there it
that little
is.
spark, don't we?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We
I
all
think
have it.
so. Spark of the divine, right?
Well, and I think we wouldn't realize it, like you said, if we didn't come down here and live it, then we wouldn't experience and we wouldn't be able to ascend to go back to God. You
Yeah.
know, the one thing you said I just want to touch on about learning down here, it's taken me many years. But where I'm at now is when I get something that comes into my life and it's really like, why is that going on? I don't look at it like it's happening to me. I look at it like, okay, what am I supposed to learn here? Where's the
Oh,
lesson in
wonderful.
this?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's great.
Where's the lesson in this? What is it that I need to work on that this is coming about? Because there's always a lesson, or who is this benefiting? Because you
Yeah.
never know why things happen. It could be happening for other reasons. I want to talk really quickly about the book. You have divided it into sections: old
Hmm.
marriage, something old, something new, something borrowed, something
Yeah.
blue. I want to tell the audience that that's how it's broken up. It's really kind of interesting. He does also address people who don't believe, like we were
Hmm.
talking about, people who think, this is all woo 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 kind of stuff.
Mm.
But I want to ask you really quickly, because you were talking about going to heaven before I get it out of my head here. I've talked to so many different people. The audience hears my questions. They're probably like, seriously, Nancy, but I feel like whatever we do down here, just like you said, makes a huge difference. And it depends on what we do down here. It's where we go when we go back. Because I feel there's levels of heaven. Not that
Mm.
anybody's any better or it's just no judgment, like you said. We're just all these souls, but we're all at different levels energetically. We're learning, we're all learning, learning, learning. So as we do this, and you have done this research on NDEs, have you had anybody come back and talk about that sort of thing? The different, like God's on the 10th level, and maybe people who are learning here are on the 5th level. And have you
Mhm.
heard anything like that?
I haven't had anybody report to me personally about it. I have read different ideas about that. One person said, we're all down here to go to school, and school has different grades. So sometimes you're in the first grade, third grade, eighth grade, whatever,
Okay.
and all this kind of thing. And I'm perfectly comfortable with that. I have
Yeah.
no
Okay, me
trouble,
too.
no trouble at all. Yeah.
Okay. I just thought that was interesting. The other thing I thought was really cool in your book, in the very first chapter, it's a really good book, you guys, by the way. I just want to say, you talk about Plato
Uh,
some of the philosophies. This is really interesting. This was to me very interesting. Plato talks about, it's in the Republic. He talks about Socrates remembers a near-death experience of a warrior
mhm.
called, is it Earl?
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you talk about this? I thought this was amazing information.
This was one of the oldest firsthand personal things I could find about near death experiences, which means that the phenomenon of near death experience is not something new that people are just discovering. It goes way back to the time of Plato.
Mhm.
You can pass it on through it. You can find the same thing in the Apostle Paul in Second Corinthians when he had his near death experience and was taken up to heaven. He said, "In the body or out of the body, I don't know which." He said, "I saw things which I cannot tell. I couldn't find words for it." You find it in throughout the Old Testament. The writers of the Old Testament had these many different experiences from Isaiah to Ezekiel about how they were taken up, and it just goes to show that this whole idea of near death experience I think goes back a long way. As a matter of fact, I think, and this is my own opinion, I think we can take it all the way back to those, for instance, those great painted caves in Western Europe. The shaman would have an out of body experience. And how do you describe something like that? Have you ever had the experience of waking up from a dream that was so vivid and so real and it was just perfect? And then you try to explain it and it sounded kind of dumb, because words just didn't
Yeah.
fit. We're trying to use language which is invented to fit things on this side of our perception fence, what we call reality with a small r. And we try to use language invented in this realm to explain something that is totally beyond the reality with a capital R.
Mhm.
And I just don't think we can do it. So I think those old shaman, they probably had out of body experiences through drums or through mushrooms or plants or whatever. And they were trying to explain what it was they saw, and they couldn't find the words. So they crawled way back into the womb of the earth, half a mile down in those old dank, dark caves, and they would draw pictures on the walls to try to describe what they had seen. And
Mhm.
so I think the idea of these out of body experiences or these near death experiences, I think they go back way farther than even Plato. I think they go way back into the times of the very earliest human beings. And I think we've been struggling with it for thousands and thousands of years. And it quite frankly amazes me that I could live so much of my life and so many people live their whole lives without paying attention and
Right.
without trying to understand it. And oh, I think that's a shame. That's why I think the courses you do are marvelous. They're so great, opening people's minds up to what is important. Because I guarantee you, I've never found anybody on their deathbed who said to me, "Oh, Jim, I wish I'd gone to work more." "Oh, Jim, I wish I had worried more." And nobody says that.
Well, no, everybody seems to get closer to the divine as they get closer because they know, I think
Yeah,
everybody knows, there is another side. As you're talking about near-death experiences, I feel like intuitively it's God's way of giving us a glimpse of the other side.
I
To
think so.
let, yes, certain people get this gift. I think it's a gift. I believe it's a gift because it changes people's lives once they have it.
Hmm. Yeah.
They come back
Well,
and they're totally different. And I think it's God's way of giving us a gift of a glimpse of what it's like so that we believe, so that we have
I
faith.
think so. Yeah, I think so. Um, I've never had a near-death experience because the deep dark truth about a near-death experience is you have to die in order to have one,
Right.
and that I've never had that. But I have had a lot of out-of-body experiences, but
Right.
I didn't have those until I came out here to the woods. When I was young and in the ministry for the first time, I had this crazy idea. I should have known better, but I had this crazy idea that, oh, I'm going to join this community of like-minded, spiritually seeking people, and we're going to grow together and tackle the difficult problems of life. And
Yeah.
oh, it's going to be wonderful, magic. And then I
Doesn't
discovered
work like that, huh?
the reality. Absolutely. When you become a pastor of a church, you're basically a CEO of a small company. You got to worry about budgets, you got to worry about buildings, you got to worry about people. You got to worry about visiting the sick. You got to counsel. You got to preach. You got to teach. All this kind of stuff. And pretty soon, man, 40 years went by, and
Wow.
I was I was still preaching about. I mean, there had been times during prayer, especially during music or something like that, when I would have these sense of being connected. But basically, when I hit 62 years old, I was starting to get frustrated because I was preaching about rather than experiencing.
Gotcha.
And that's what I came out here in the woods to do. I came out here to go on retreat for 1 year.
How long
I
you been
was
out there?
16.
Well,
And
wait,
I
I'm going to
was,
stop you a second. What you're talking about is what I learned because of necessity. A lot of people do. I went through a really bad divorce. I was just at a certain place in my life where I knew, I'd been connecting with God, but I hadn't really taken the time where I connect every day. Now I connect every day and I have for a long time. So did you get to the point where you started meditating and bringing in that light from the
20
divine?
24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's what I dedicated myself to. I wanted to live in a meditation.
Right.
I had been on retreats. For me, it didn't work. It wasn't long enough. I couldn't slough everything off. And I had taken to long distance bicycle riding, for instance. I've ridden across the country from California to Massachusetts, and I've ridden from Florida to Massachusetts. And to me, that was some of the most meditative times I ever had. There's something
Right.
zen-like about being
Right.
on a bike and the pedals and the repetition and everything else.
Yeah.
But it wasn't long enough. I wanted to really wrap myself into it. I even had a Bible verse in mind. When I came out here, I had a verse that I wrote down and I said it every day. I will not let you go until you bless me. I mean, that was Jacob had said that to Esau after they had been separated in the Old Testament. And Jacob now comes back and he's going to meet his brother the next day. He doesn't know what's going to happen. And he's up pacing on his side of the river while Esau's off on his side of the river. And a guy shows up and Jacob wrestles with him all night. I couldn't ever understand that until Jacob realized he was wrestling with God, or an angel of God, some people say. And he said, I will not let you go until you bless me. That was the prayer that was on my lips. And I have to tell you a sequel to this story,
Okay.
because after living with this prayer, I will not let you go until you bless me, and wrestling with God, about 3 4 years went by, and I was invited to Cornwall in the UK to give a talk about the roots of world religions.
Oh, wow.
So I had a wonderful time there with the people in
Oh,
Cornwall, but
yeah. Oh,
it
yeah.
was my first time in England, so I had to go to a little town where my ancestors used to preach, in a little church called Fenny Compton up northwest in London.
Oh, my God.
And the same stone church was still there. Now I'm talking about my great 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 great
How cool,
grandfather
right?
Willis, and I wanted to go back and I wanted to see the church that he actually preached in. So I went back there and met the town historian, and she took me in, and I saw his name on the wall, a plaque, one of the former
Oh, my
ministers.
gosh.
And I got up in his pulpit, and I was standing in the very pulpit where he used to preach, and I looked across the sanctuary, and there was a stained glass window that had been there ever since his time. And lo and behold, it was a picture of Jacob wrestling with God, saying, I will not let you go until you bless me.
Wow.
Now, how that guy's DNA, spiritual DNA, got passed down to me, and generations later, that was the prayer that I brought with me to the woods.
Isn't that
I have no idea, but God answered the prayer.
That's
It
God
didn't.
speaking to you.
Yeah,
That's God speaking to
exactly.
you. Now I have to ask you a question because we're talking about connecting and you understand why I'm teaching everybody how to do this.
Sure, sure.
So did you finally realize that you need to bring in the light? I mean,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
did you finally, because it was like, I can't even, if you ask me, like, when did I realize? I can't even tell you, to be honest with you.
For
But
me, For me, I think it was my first out of body experience.
Talk about this. And can I just ask you, and I'm a little nervous about the out of body experience.
Mhm.
I always say this because, please, no judgment, no judgment. I don't want anyone to think that I'm being judgmental. I'm nervous personally because I think we're not supposed to do it. Because if we were meant to do it, everybody'd be doing it. And I know we have this silver cord that's attached, and I always worry, like, what if it would break? Because then you die.
Yeah.
So that's me. So
Yeah.
talk about this. I mean, help me
Well,
out here, Jim.
I I wasn't necessarily seeking it.
Okay.
I was just praying. I was saying, if you're there, please reveal yourself. Who are you? And
Okay.
my first out of body experience was so profound, and I just found myself actually outside of myself. It bothered me too, to tell you the honest truth. You know, what if I
Okay.
can't come back and all this
Well,
kind of
yeah,
stuff?
that's what I'm always
But
like, oh my God.
I did go up to Monroe Institute
Yeah, you
with
write about that in the
Bob
book.
Monroe,
Yes.
and I was in contact with, oh, some, even, you know, people who were involved in the remote viewing that Bob Monroe used to teach up there. I'm talking about Skip Atwater and Joseph McGonigal, the number one remote viewer, which is why I was so interested in your interview a couple of weeks ago
Yes.
with yes, I was fascinated
With the
by that.
remote viewer that I
Yeah,
had on, yeah,
yeah,
Michelle
that's right.
Freed. She was
Yeah,
on. Yeah.
and I had been in touch with Dean Radin at the time too, who was out at the Noetic Institute, and Skip and Joe and Dean, all of them, they couldn't say anything until the records were revealed. But here was the Monroe Institute, you know, basically teaching out of body experiences. Well, I went up there to study with Bill Buhlman. I thought I needed guidance, and I studied with Bill Buhlman, and I think William Buhlman is probably one of the best teachers for out of body experiences that is working in the world today. He's just wonderful, wonderful teacher. And I spent a week up there with another group of people who were all experiencing, sometimes for the first time, in some cases, and like in my case, you know, um, and I decided well, Bill is convinced that anybody can have an out of body experience if they're willing to really intentionally practice a meditation and using different techniques for 30 minutes a day for 30 days. And I did that. And I was very fortunate in that apparently this was how I had to experience the other side. It wasn't enough for me to use just my intuition or faith being a left brain theologian all my life. It wouldn't have probably worked that way. I couldn't
Well,
think
yeah,
my
because
way
faith does
through.
come into play. And I don't mean to interrupt your train of thought, but faith,
Yeah, no.
I mean, faith is a big deal. Go ahead.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I also had to do it through dowsing. I practiced. I never knew anything about dowsing. I just thought you douse for water.
Right.
But when I was dowsing for earth energies and things, I found myself in a three-way conversation with actually another spirit, and I would have my dowsing rods in, and I would actually get yes or no answers.
Right.
And then I began to understand that this particular spirit was actually me on the other side. It was the essence of me who I had left on the other side of the Higgs field when I came over here into the material world.
Now, do you
And
call it your higher self?
yes, I call it my
Okay.
or uh,
Another part of you.
spiritual spiritual guide.
Okay.
And I discovered that through dowsing, I had to come to the point, because I think my way through problems, and that doesn't always work. I had to come to the point where I had to realize my body knew things that I didn't know, and I couldn't understand them because I was trying to transpose them through my head. And with me, at least in my own particular case, uh, dowsing my own body let me know uh, what I was actually feeling. It's kind of like, oh, you remember the old black and white televisions with the rabbit ears on top. You know,
Right. You were getting in
you
touch.
yeah, you held the rabbit ears up and you could change the picture on the screen, and you
Yeah.
didn't realize until you held those rabbit ears. Oh goodness, those television waves are going right through my body. My body knows it, but I don't, you know. And so they become kind of an electronic dowsing rod, so to speak. And with me, that's probably what I needed. I needed something that could break through well, now 78 years of left brain thinking. I needed something to help get me out. Now, I'm not saying, let's face it, dowsing can take you down a primrose path just like anything else can. We have to be very careful, and I think we have to be um, very open to surrounding ourselves with safeguards and things like that, because I think we can get into real trouble
Well, yeah, that's what
if we
I
go
always
too far.
That's what
Yeah.
I think. Well, and I don't want to get in, I don't want you to tell us all your experiences, but is there one experience, out of body experiences that something happened that you think you'd like to share with us?
Ooh, many. That's the problem. Uh, Probably the most personally uplifting, and this is going to maybe sound weird to viewers and everything else, but the most uplifting one I had was in an out of body experience. I had a series of about three or four of them. Um, I actually met uh, a woman whose name was Sarah, and she had died back in Germany. I think it was probably during the war. I couldn't get it all straight. But she was so connected to this life, and I had the idea because she was probably um, very close to her family, and I think her family was killed in the uh, concentration camps in Germany. And I think she was so connected with this life that she couldn't leave it, and she had
That's
kind of tied herself down here.
Mhm.
And the first time I met her, we could have this somehow communication. And then the second time I had learned a little more, and the third, I was actually able to lead her out to the light if she wanted to go and if she wanted to pass. And she did. And it was very uplifting to me.
right. I do the same
I,
thing in the shower.
yeah.
No, I'm
I,
serious.
yeah,
I do the same thing. They come to me in the shower.
yeah.
Oh,
Well,
that's where they come to me.
well, you're open and
I'm open
receiving,
in the shower. And so I
Yeah.
send people to the light in the
I
shower.
had, I had another experience
No, I
though.
want to say something about this. Wait, stop. You know, I have done this a lot over the
Yeah.
years,
Yeah.
and the first time, it's always scary and you don't even know if you're crazy or what you're doing, but you kind of figure it out and you ask other people and you do it. But I want to say to your comment, it is one of the most gratifying things I've ever done.
Yeah. It I have just the opposite story though of a
Oh God.
spirit that didn't go on,
Okay.
but it was still uplifting. I got a call from a neighbor one time. She said, "Can I come over right away?" She had had a feeling of what I was doing, the kind of work I was doing.
Yeah.
I said, "Yeah," and she said, my my son and his wife and their little kid, they came over last night. It was the middle of the night. They were knocking on our door, and they said, "There's something going on in their house, and they don't understand what's going on."
Um,
And she said, "I know you do, Dowsing. Can you go over there and check it out? There's things, knocks and noises and vibrations and stuff like that." I said, "Okay, sure." So the next day I sat down with her and I had her draw a picture of the house where all the different rooms were and everything else. And I took my pendulum out and I was housing.
oh, yeah.
And I could sense there was something really going on. So that afternoon, we trundled over in the car,
Oh my
and
gosh. Hope you had holy water. Did you bring
yeah,
holy water?
no, no, I didn't. I probably well, at any rate, it worked out. But I dowsed around the perimeter of the house, and I saw that the house was adjacent to two very powerful energy lines. They crossed right in the middle
Oh,
of the house, and
wow.
so I said, "Okay, that tells us that there's a lot of energy here. Do you want to go inside?" So she said, "I don't, but you can go ahead." So I went inside, I had my dowsing rods, and lo and behold, I met these two spirits who were not malevolent at all. It just seemed fine. I didn't see them, obviously, but I was able to communicate with them through dowsing. Are you happy? Yes. Do you want to stay here? Yes, and everything else. Well, I went back into the town records and discovered something very strange had happened in that house. Um, I live in the South, and during Jim Crow days, especially, mixed, relations were just not seen, black and white. And this woman was a fairly well-off, young white woman who had fallen in love with a black man in town. And when it became apparent that he was seeing what in the town's eyes too much of her, they took him out and they lynched him. He was hanged, and she spent the rest of her life in that house, but wouldn't leave. And when she died, apparently her spirit stayed right there. And because of the energy lines, because of the energy crossing there, he was able to be with her in that wonderful, rich energy. And they were able to be together. And they didn't want to go on. They were perfectly happy. So I could go back to them and I could say, you don't want to go on? No, we're happy right here. I said, okay, just don't disturb the family who lives here so much. Okay, keep it down. And as far as I know, they're still there.
So,
They're
yeah.
very happy. And I find that somehow uplifting too. So I don't know.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy. And you wonder, okay, will they when will that come to a halt? And like, and why didn't their guardian angel see? Here's is my question, because I work
I
with my
don't.
guardian angel all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah,
And we
yeah.
got to wrap it up because we've been here almost an hour, but I'll just say
Oh,
this. I just wonder why their angel didn't like help them. Because when people come to me, and I need to even ask, I've never even asked, but people come to me all the time, and I think to myself, now wait a minute, why didn't they just go? But I guess there's always a reason. People, I
yeah.
think they're not ready. They feel like they have unfinished business. I think
Hmm.
there's a lot of reasons why loved ones, they
Yeah,
just don't
yeah.
leave. It's really interesting. Before we get out of here, I do want to touch on remote viewing. You said you heard my interview that I did
Yes.
with Michelle.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always been a little freaked out about that too, because
I can imagine why. When I heard why, you were freaked out with
well,
somebody checking you out there.
here's the thing, and I'll just be honest, and I don't mind saying this on the show. I've interviewed, gosh, I'm close to 500 people I've interviewed in my
Hmm.
podcast and my shows over time. I've learned so much. I've heard
Hmm.
so many wonderful stories. So much good information has been brought through, but I'm very psychic. And
Hmm.
I've become even more and more and more as I've connected to God, as you know.
Hmm.
So when someone is going to be on my show and I feel them in my house, it's really hard for me to interview them.
Oh, I can imagine.
It's
Yeah,
so hard.
I think I think like anything else, we
Like,
have a
don't come in my
tendency,
house.
I think, as humans to take uh, anything that's new and
No.
exciting, but especially that's powerful, and abuse it.
Well, what do you think
And
about this thing? Because I'll tell you what, and I'm not joking. Important things I turn over on my desk.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
I do. There's certain things
I,
that I
I
don't leave out because I know people can come if they want to. I don't think it's right. What do you think about this? I know, and you write about it in your book. You do a whole section on this where you talk about and you brought him up Atwater
hmm.
recruiting remote viewers, and this
Yeah,
was done in the
yeah.
military. And give me your synopsis on before we get out of here today on
Well,
this.
I've corresponded with him a couple of times, and he sent me a couple of reports. And he went on to work after he got out of the military. He went on to work at the Monroe Institute, and I think he's troubled himself about some of this stuff.
Okay. Thank you.
Our,
'Cause I don't want to be the
it,
only one, right?
yeah, no, I don't. Whenever a government takes over something and makes it top secret and keeps the papers covered for 25 years, you begin to wonder, well, what are they using this stuff for? And is that right? I think it's like any other great weapon. I mean, um, power, electric power, for instance, is great, but it can be abused. Um, uh, Nuclear power probably has great purposes, but it can be abused, as we've seen. Einstein had real troubles with the nuclear bomb. Oppenheimer, the same thing. And when the practice bomb went off, and Oppenheimer said those words, "I have become the angel of death." Um, these are powerful forces, but the thing is, they're real forces.
Yeah.
Out of body, remote viewing, near death experiences, they're not just woo woo spiritual
No,
stuff.
they're real.
There is there is a science behind it, and probably isn't a science that we understand. But I think we have to be very careful. I think with great knowledge and with great power comes great responsibility, and we humans are not particularly great sometimes when it comes to responsibility.
Well, yeah, and that's why, and I'll just bring up the AI stuff. I
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
like, and I'll touch on this before we get out of here. I don't like people have come on my show and said, oh, I can connect to God with the AI. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
Are you serious right now? But why would you want to do that? Why
Yeah.
here I am going, wait a minute, you guys, wait a minute. Chill on that and let's connect to the real source because
Yeah.
that's how we,
Yeah.
feel joyful and loved and, balanced and everything. And then you've got somebody over here, well, I've got artificial that can make you feel the same way, but that's
Mhm.
not possible.
Yeah.
And so I see a lot of that coming into play, which really scares me. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly. I'm scared of it too. I came out here in the woods to get away from everybody, just because I wanted to be alone with God. And then
Yeah.
they went and put some fiber optic cables, so now I can talk to you. And there are probably more people listening to us right now than ever heard me preach in a church or teach in a college classroom. And
Well, maybe
so,
you're supposed to get the word out.
maybe, but it is disconcerting. We're playing with dangerous toys, and
We
I'm not
really
sure.
are. We
I'm
are.
not sure that we have, as a species, acquired the spirituality, the morality, and the ethics yet to play with some of these toys. And like you, it scares me. And yet it's happening. It's here. So we have to say,
Gonna
we have
deal
to
with it.
face it. We have to face it and deal with it. That's right.
Yeah. Thank you for coming on the show. You guys,
Oh, thank you.
you're welcome. Near-death
Been
experience.
great being with you, Nancy.
Oh, thank you, Jim. Near-death experiences, afterlife journeys, and revelations. If you're watching us on the video, I'm holding it up. It's a really pretty
Oh,
cover.
one more thing I have to put in.
Okay.
Um, you and I can see each other face to face through the miracle of technology, but we never know who's out there. So I always like to invite people. Please go to my website,
Oh, yeah.
jimwillis.net, and there's a contact page, and there you can send me an email, and I will try to answer every single email that I get. I would love to know this community of people who is interested in all of this, and I'd love to meet some of the people who may have heard this broadcast.
Fabulous. Jimwillis.net is his website. And go to nancyyourout.com and I'll teach you how to connect to
There
your
you go.
guardian angel and to God and to the earth energies. Everyone, thanks for joining us today. It's been a really fun show. I hope everybody has a fabulous week and God bless.